Clint,
Colette,
how's it going?
it's going very well. How about yourself?
I'm okay. I am wearing my punk rock safety shirt, newly purchased. Such a fan of the podcast. Was a guest on the podcast. Really love those guys. Um, yeah, and I think when you wear a punk rock safety shirt all day, you basically you up your level of energy. You make it through. So
Your episode is like second down on my episodes to listen to list. It's been
oh well.
making its way up. Like I'm excited to listen.
They're fun. They're very rambly. I will tell you, I finished that episode being like, did I just like was it too weird? Was I not playing along enough? Like, was I not? They are really fun, but it is doing one of those episodes, or and I think listening to them, because I do listen to them as much as I can. They take you on a twist and turns, so it's worth it. It's worth taking a listen. What's new in your world?
Oh gosh, ski season started. That is exciting.
Any incidents so far in ski season?
You could call it an incident. So, I have many children. For the listeners who don't know, I have 4, and they're all at different levels of skiing. My 8-year-old daughter, definitely the least developed skill. And we went to the opening day of Mammoth, which is crazy. Never done that before. And my wife and I thought it would be a good idea to just take her up to the top. She skied all last year. She went on Black Diamonds. But like the first day after 6 months off of skis, we had a little bit of an incident. Mostly operator hesitance.
But she's okay, I hope.
She's okay.
No
she
broken
made it out.
bones.
She's not traumatized.
Okay.
I think. I mean, she may, this one may end up in her therapist session in her 20s, but we made it down, and then we spent the rest of the day on the bunny slope. And actually, I probably needed that too, to kick the rust off. I was a little dangerous out there on those blue runs.
Well, I'm glad that you're getting back out on the slopes. I'm glad it's that season. What are we going to do today? What are we going to talk about today?
I'm excited to talk about one of our listener questions that we've received.
Yeah, we have had some guests. But we also have gotten some more questions as we've released episodes, right? And so this is a really great one. I thought it was a great one. You thought it was a great one. Do you want me to read it, or do you want to read it?
Take it away.
All right. What's your favorite way of introducing folks to resilience engineering /human factors /etc.? Is it a particular paper, a concept that lands well, an outage that you can walk them through? I love this question. I love it especially because I feel like one of the goals of our podcast is to be more introductory and accessible about this stuff. Do you have an answer or two?
I definitely do. And I'm like super curious about your answers because people may not know this, like you have the formal education part going on in your life of resilience engineering. And I'm just faking it, running down the road, absorbing things through osmosis and through you and through being with all of these amazing experts on it. So I feel like our answers might be very different, but I'm interested to see if they intersect.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, the one thing that had the most impact at the beginning of the journey for me, really from like just reliability into resilience, was the session with ACL that we did together. Actually, you and I did this together with the great late Dr. Cook. And somebody said, well, that's covered in How Complex Systems Fail. And I was like, what's that? And I feel like that moment of everybody like, oh, he isn't ready yet. like, you need a minute. That's been, I give that one almost all the time if I'm starting to have the conversation. It's definitely not the first thing, But when I see that people are like, what are you on about, Clint? Like, what are you talking? That doesn't sound like how I think the world works. I say, well, let's talk about this. And I'll usually send them a relevant to their current situation link to the How Complex Systems Fail
Did you
website.
read it as like a PDF or no? So you went to how.complexsystems.fail.
That's how
You
I
went to the
started.
website.
I have read it as a PDF as well, but that's still how I give it out to people because it has links for each number, which is really nice.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so cool. When you read it, what did the aha feel like?
I think there's a couple of big things, and I think they hit a lot of people, which is that this didn't come from us, from Intel. Like, so much of what I've gotten and has been an influence and I've built my career on has been like, someone in tech went here first and they found this. And I learned from that. Like, I think about another one we can talk about, like the Phoenix Project talks about tech. It takes learnings from but it's tech. But this was like, here's a doctor, a medical doctor, calling complex systems hazardous. And then I read the paragraph. Like, I'm going to read number one. All of the interesting systems, e.g. transportation, healthcare, power generation, so nothing really about tech, are inherently and unavoidably hazardous by their own nature. Just that. I was like, oh, yeah, tech is hazardous too. I've lost millions of dollars for companies. I've protected millions of dollars. That feels hazardous. Like, that was a big aha for me, is that like we could actually learn from other industries that have been here before. We're not all that special. That was a big part of it for me. And then also number 4, I send number 4 to people almost like weekly, which is complex systems contain changing mixtures of failures latent within them. That one is to like let people calm down. Like, we don't have to fix this today. Like, this is there for a reason. We don't know why. And also number 7 is a huge one, which is the one I think most annoying to people, which is about root cause.
Oh, yeah. There's no such thing.
That is a controversial statement, apparently, not amongst our resilience engineering folks, right? But I was giving a talk at Agile 2024, and in the middle, I was sort of covering like, what could you do with an incident? What could you do? Could you sweep it under the rug? Can you do like a 5 whys? And then I put up a slide with root cause, and I said, or you could produce a useful fiction. And
gauntlet thrown.
and this gentleman took it quite personally. Like, this is what his job is, making root cause analysis in a factory, no tech involved. And we got there. We got there in that conversation, the 5 minutes in that talk. I understood what I was talking about, and like, oh well, yeah. I mean, there's not one root cause, and it's like, okay, we're gonna get there. We're gonna be okay.
Yeah. Can you remind me what 7 says explicitly?
Yeah,
again?
I'm gonna read just a little bit of it. But the title is "Post-Accident Attribution to a Root Cause," quotes, "is fundamentally wrong." So that right there is like shots fired for folks who are really happy about root cause. And then, because overt failure requires multiple faults, there is no isolated cause of an accident. Like, that alone, those two, just the title and that, will start to get people really, really questioning themselves or questioning you if you're telling them. And so I like sending it to people and being like, about root cause, like, have you ever read this? And then they know, like, oh, we're going to have an argument.
I think that's the interesting thing too about introducing it to people, right? Like, for somebody, the question was, what do you give to people who are new? And I think that there has to be this combination of provocativeness to it, right? It has to bring you in and challenge you, but it also has to do it in a way that is still accessible. And I love how complex systems fail because it's a list. It's just a list. And it's pretty brief, and it's not like some crazy annotated academic paper, right? but it has annotations and it cites its sources, and it is rooted and grounded in science. So I think that's a great choice.
What else you got?
Do you want to know one of mine? I can talk about mine. So I think we're both Richard Cook fans today and every day. I chose Richard's talk at Velocity. It's on YouTube. It's pretty easy to find. Velocity 2013. Resilience in Complex Systems, I think. This is a talk that I will send to people to explain. He does a lot of things in the talk, but primary of which is that he explains Rasmussen's failure boundaries, which is an academic concept, but he does it in a way it's very focused on tech, and he talks through the sort of relationship that it has to tech as he's explaining what the boundary model means for us in the tech world. And it's very accessible. It's very interesting, and it has my favorite, Richard quote, which is, "You're not surprised that things are down. You're surprised they were ever up at all." And I think that totally sums up concepts of resilience engineering that we need to start to anchor ourselves in more, which is, why are we up at all? A question I just asked somebody the other day at work. I think it was yesterday. Yeah, so that's my pick. It's a good talk.
Yeah, that one is actually, those two pair nicely, right? Same two things from Dr. Cook. And that one I think I saw years before the ACL, and I didn't really get it. I mean, it did. It made sense to me, of course, but it didn't sink in. But I think it prepared me. Those concepts came back out of my memory as I was starting to learn more about resilience engineering in general. I remember hearing about this.
Yeah.
I may have even been at that Velocity. I don't remember. I think I was at there. I don't think I was in the talk, but I think I was actually in the hallway for that one. And it strikes me that sometimes this can feel very new to people who are just hearing a different way of thinking about failure and incidents. This is old wisdom, right? These are, but it is, are there other industries? Do you know of other industries that are going through it at the same pace we are? I know aviation went through it and has changed fundamentally. I remember, was it Dr. Pupulidy? I may have said his name wrong, and I really apologize. Pupulidy gave a talk at that LFI Conf in Denver that kind of blew my mind on how they had changed accident investigations. And I fell down a rabbit hole watching all of his old talks. And I send that one to people quite often, and as pay attention to this. You're asking the wrong questions. You're making the wrong assumptions. You're putting people in a dark place. That one often makes sense. I think we should actually include links to all of this.
Yeah, we will in the show notes.
Show notes, for sure, and in the descriptions, I think, if we can. But do you remember that talk? Do you remember what? I
actually haven't watched it. I did want to say talking with punk rock safety folks, and actually talking with folks at Lund, where the Lund graduate program in human factors and system safety is this program that it's a master's that you can do while you still work. In fact, you have to still be working in order to do it. And everybody who is in your class is also a practitioner in some way. And almost all of my class was a practitioner, not in tech. I think there were 2 of us that were computer people in the room. Everybody else was, it's a lot of mariners. Half my class was Dutch pilots. There were folks who were in child safety. So they do child welfare and safety. Actually, there's a group of people who work in child welfare and safety in the United States who are very well versed in human factors, for lack of a better word, safety to focused. We call it, oh man, I'm gonna blank now on the term. Local rationality investigations for when something has occurred in the child welfare system, which is talk about charged, right, and difficult situations. So yeah, there's a whole group of people who do that. A lot of them are trained at Lund, or at least have a degree at Lund. And then we had someone who was a sheriff who was talking about police, incidents and things like that. That was really fascinating for me. So just people in all aspects of safety, healthcare practitioners, obviously, and hearing from them, it's like the airline. Yes, maybe the airline investigations in the United States are done in a particular way, and they've seen the light on some of this stuff. But I guarantee you that airline safety management systems are not necessarily at the same level of awareness or, all of that. And that was a really fascinating thing to learn too. And a thing that made me really think about how are we going to do better in tech? What are the advantages we have right now that will allow us to do better by some of this work and some of this theory and some of this science? And then what are the things that make it more difficult for us to do than these other? And I think regulation actually fits on potentially both ends of that, but probably our lack of regulation certainly makes it easier for us to adopt some of this now.
Yeah.
One would hope.
Yeah. And we call it something else, tech, right? We call it compliance, right? Which is not necessarily compliance with regulations, compliance with like programs, right? Like I think about SOC 2, if you've ever been through a SOC 2 compliance. This is more like making insurance companies happy to insure you, right? Or certain government programs to allow you to sell to them, right?
Or even anybody to sell. I mean, I've used SOC 2 as like an enterprise sales tool. Your SOC 2 compliance is an enterprise sales tool.
But that's like probably an order of magnitude softer than the regulations on hazardous chemical handling, right? Because like we may lose money and that is a harm and that is an important thing. But like if we let out some bad data, it's not the same as letting out a hazardous chemical into a residential area, right? So
in theory, but I mean, as we explored with John Oldsaw,
it's true.
I think, and as tech is sort of entrenched in all of these different places and all of these different parts of the world, I think that becomes less and less true.
Yeah, it's really true. And I constantly stumble into that, like assuming that we know how our tech is being used and where it is and who's affected by it, when the complexity we don't even know how we're affected by it. That is one of our disadvantages, I think. We can't really see often, like whether you're making like tools or running a social media service, you can't look at all of it. Like this is something in current job, there's a large complex system, lots of users doing lots of things. And we constantly are asking ourselves like, okay, but we made that change. What happened? Like, what did the users feel that? And you've got like histograms with latency graphs and you've got traces and you've got samples. You have some ideas, but they're all just like on the surface level clues. I would actually love to have material on this. This is something I'm hoping you are bringing actually to this. Like I have this conversation quite often with leaders when they ask hard questions and I'm unwilling to provide definitive answers. And they're like, but can you just tell me? And I explain observability to them a little bit, but I need the same like how complex systems fail. I need that like observability.
How all observability is a lie.
Yes, I need that. I need do you have like a thing that you send people for that?
John also did a talk explaining above the line, below the line, which is, I think, actually what you're talking about, at least partially.
Partially.
Yeah. I think his work he did work with Richard Cook on that as well. So they both have done presentations, and Richard Cook and Dave Woods did a presentation at Velocity on that as well.
Well, we'll have to maybe get Dave Woods on sometime.
Yeah, that would be great.
To talk about that. But you mentioned something. I want to go back. You mentioned something. I put like a little pin in it in my mind. You said safety 2. And I suspect that that's another one that you might, I don't know if it's introductory, but that's another one I've referred to.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Safety 2. So
what are we talking about? Safety 1 and safety 2.
Part of this is also like, oh, now my Lund brain is like slowly, I can feel the engine trying to start. The ignition is making some noises. There is loosely in the safety world, and by the safety world, I mean the broad world of people who are like, hold the staircase when you're on the oil rig. Like, that's part of our safety world, right? So in the broader safety world, there is this concept of safety 1 and safety 2. And safety 1 is where you focus on failure and you find a root cause, and is this sort of logical progression of totally tied together things that happen to cause the problem. And if you just put up some posters and tell people not to do those things, then you're doing your job, right? Safety 2 is, sometimes it's not the same thing by any means, but it is often used in tandem with talking about a new view of safety. It is often used in tandem with talking about resilience engineering. But essentially it is, rather than focusing on the failure and root causing it and doing these kind of, we're going to give you a checklist and these are the things you have to do kind of thing. It's more like, let's look at how everyday work is happening. Let's look at how people are safe every day. Let's look at the many different sort of various aspects of and contributions to failure when it happens. Let's try to be blameless, or sort of have less focus on blame, that sort of thing, right? So it's sort of like there's this view, and it's not as pat as that, right? Because there are so many different thinkers throughout the last century of thinking about safety that have so much more nuance in their views. It's safety 1 and safety 2 is a very pat way of thinking about it, in my opinion.
It feels like that easy categorization that is not easy at all, right? But it's so like tempting to put every activity like must be in one of those buckets. And I can tell that there's probably some controversy in the more academic side of the resilience engineering world about whether that's true. But I've only recently, like about 6 months ago, discovered it, read through it. Your summary sounds like what I have in my head. And I do like that it gives us a name for the new thing.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the things, I think we talked about this even last time. It's hard sometimes to talk because there's so much depth to what we're actually saying is different than what you think. I wish we had a better name than resilience engineering, because that just invites this massive conversation. And at least at safety 2, it feels more like a progression. Like, oh, we want to get you to safety 2. You're only on safety 1, but that's not really how it works. But that's what that invites in my mind, is like, oh yeah, we're trying to get to safety 2. One day we'll have blameless postmortems, and then we'll be at safety 2.
Right. And it invites a way to be like, well, now we are safety 2. Like, now we have arrived, and this is what we do. And I think that's also the danger of it. It's like any simplified concept will always invite people to sort of paper over the things that are not quite right about. I'm curious what your second, do you have a second pick? Anything else you give to people when they're?
I have an open slot in the second pick. And I'll tell you why. And it's frustrating to me, but I think you might be trying to help. I used to send people the book Accelerate. It's actually behind me on my bookshelf still. I still think there's a wealth of good information in there. And it was transformative for me when it came out. And I have stopped sending it along because of some of the problems that have been identified. I think we're actually going to talk to Vanessa on a lot of that. So I won't get too far into it, but what I've always tried to do is give people real action plans. Like, okay, you've read How Complex System Fails. You're understanding how I think, right? A little bit. These are like really nice breakdowns of some of the things that are counterintuitive you may not have thought about. Here's a way to put that into action now, today, to start. And Accelerate used to be kind of a good choice for that. I'm looking for one. Like, I have tidbits of advice. I have conversations. I really need that book. Attention, resilience, authors out there, potential, including my co-host. When is that book coming out?
How to Get Started in Resilience Engineering. Yeah. I think that would be a very useful book. Unfortunately, we have a lot of papers and a lot of science, not a lot of practical, hands-on, although we do have a lot of case studies. And I will say, I think that more of that is coming, right? More of these case studies of places where resilience is truly, we're recognizing it after the fact. And the next step is being able to explain to people how to sort of forward engineer the thing.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I do sometimes also just send them my talk from Agile 2024, which was sort of trying to fill this space with a practical manual for like, here's how to change your thinking a little bit. Here's what sharp and blunt end is. Like just the basic stuff from the surface of what I see as the change. But even me watching it back, or I don't have a video of it yet, but going through the slides again, I mean, it was a 90-minute slot. I filled it all up. There's just so much. We need that condensed thing to help people get started. Like, it's like the Etsy handbook, right? Which is just about one thing about facilitating incidents or incident reviews, right? I want, or like the DevOps handbook.
There's the Howie Guide.
Oh, that Howie Guide. I totally forgot about the Howie Guide. I did send that to people for a while.
The Howie Guide,
just
I think, is super useful. Yeah.
Yeah. Where does that live these days?
I think it's on the internet somewhere. You should Google the Howie Guide, HOWIE. It should show up as a PDF.
Yeah, that was put out by Jelly.
Jelly,
right?
Yeah. Our friends at Jelly put it out, and Jelly was bought by PagerDuty. So I assume that PagerDuty owns the content. We'll provide a link in the show notes if we've got it. What else? Do you want to know my nerdy second one?
Oh, I'm dying to know it.
So, like, okay, nobody wants to read an academic paper. Like, let's be real. They'll put you to sleep. Like, even the best ones will put you to sleep. That's why I'm like, you don't want to read my thesis. It will put you to sleep. But if you are into academic papers, if that's a thing that you are curious about, I really like Going Solid. It's by Richard Cook and Dave Woods, and it is a description of a system at saturation point. It is an examination of that, and I think that's a really useful for me, at least as a manager, certainly, that's a very useful thing to think about. What does a system at saturation point look like? How do we understand, like, what are the signals that we can get about that? I really love that paper. There's also just a banger of a paper. It is pretty
You just said a banger of a paper.
Banger of a paper. So this guy, Ben Hutchinson, if you're into this stuff, if you are into the super safety nerd stuff, follow Ben Hutchinson on LinkedIn. He's so lovely. He posts summaries of papers every now and then. I actually cited him a ton in my research because he's done this work on fantasy documents and enabling devices, which is what my thesis research was on. But at any rate, he and I both have this phrase. We have both separately used it, it turns out, and discovered that each other used it. So, but a banger of a paper by Lee Clarke and Charles Perrow. I'm going to live Google it right now. Lee Clarke, Charles Perrow. So it is prosaic organizational failure. No. Yes. Prosaic organizational failure. Now, what I love about this is, as a paper, it tells a great story. And it's a story about how a Long Island power plant got built but never used. A nuclear power plant got built but never used, and they were never allowed to turn it on because they failed so miserably at any of the possible safety explorations of like how they would evacuate and how all of that would go. And like the tiniest little requirements of them, like all of their documents that they wrote. And this was the beginning of Lee Clarke investigating fantasy documents, which was also influential in my thesis. So, but the paper's so funny because it describes, it's so well written. It's very dry, but it's very hilarious because they're like listing like, they said all of these school buses would do these things to go get the children from the school, but then like nobody shows up to drive the school buses, right? And so everybody's like, well, I guess we failed that one. And, this was just a mild little, 1/20th of the thing. And they just, it's like, if you've ever read like a tear down piece and you've loved it, like a takedown piece of journalism on something that you are like ready to experience, it's just, it gives you that visceral satisfaction of like, wow, this is a disaster. Like, wow, this is amazing. Like, this is truly incredible. And it just is the perfect illustration of their point of, we make these plans, we have these catastrophic technologies, these complex, tightly coupled things that can fail. And we to justify them, we write these stories about how we're totally mitigating for any possible failure. And they are absolute fucking mythologies. Like, they are not based in reality at all, right? Lee Clarke has a lot of these examples in his book about this. But this was, I think, this paper that he wrote with Charles Perrow was kind of him kicking off this idea. And it's a good one. It's a banger.
I will definitely read it. I will always read a banger of a paper. I'll admit to having a hard time getting through some of the other papers that I've been sent in the resilience engineering community, but Going Solid actually was a good one as well. Your description, well, one, I think we've all seen that like platform capability that everyone says we need, and we start building, and 4 years later it's canceled, never having been used, right? Like listeners, like, send us your emails, your accounts of this. I think we'll get one for every 10 listeners of the show, right? Like, this is like a constant. Like, power plants, I'm sure that's pretty rare, but in platforms for software, like, this is like table stakes. You have to have at least one piece of your platform that never got used.
Well, so what I would say is, with power plants, the existence of fantasy documents is exceedingly common. And this is what they're saying. The fact that the community organized around this power plant and said, we don't want nuclear power in our backyard. And obviously, I think this was like in the 80s, so it was probably a little bit, in
Down
some
the
ways.
road from 3 Mile Island, right?
Right. So there was probably a little bit more oomph behind that community activism, but it was the community activism in the political space that forced the hand of the power company to try out some of these things that were on their document. And but like Lee Clarke goes well into the Exxon Valdez. Exxon had produced a ton of literature about how they had all of this technology that was going to be able to clean up all of this stuff. They estimated, if we had a large oil spill, we would be able to clean up 40 to 60% of it. I think they ended up being able to clean up like 4% of the Valdez. It just absolute lies, and their justification for these assertions is not based in any kind of reality or testing or anything. Like it's some folks writing some stuff on a paper to make themselves feel better about what it is they're about to do.
I feel like one of my superpowers as a longtime engineer is spotting those fantasy documents early, whether it's like an RFC or somebody's big plan, and just asking those questions that shatter them. Like that's, I feel like the main part of my job, honestly, is like spotting that and going like, hey, that thing right there, like that's never going to happen, right? Like that's impossible, isn't it? And having other engineers go, yeah, I've been thinking that too. Like heading those off, I guess that goes to like one of the advantages of software is like we can often spot these things earlier on. Like they may have already been 30% in building and they're like, here's our fantasy document. But that I think they're everywhere. In every complex system. And we have like, there's like a pejorative term for people who produce these as a matter of course. You may have heard it. Architecture astronauts. Right? We've all heard that.
Why astronauts?
Because they're taking the architecture to the moon. They're taking it all the way up. They're just building. I actually think it's not a great term. Like it doesn't really describe the thing, but we all know what it means.
Because astronauts exist. They go to space.
They do, and they're really focused on safety and they have things dialed in, which is why it doesn't actually work. But what I know, the knowing laugh that you gave, like we've heard this used.
Yeah,
I've had it used against me. I don't use it actually because I think it's a silly term, but it gets thrown around sometimes when people have produced these fantasy documents. They're like, well, we're not going to space with this architecture. Briefly. And I know we've been going a while. I thought of another that I do send to people, and I'll just cover it really quickly because I'm sad that I didn't remember this one actually before. There's this article called The Maintenance Race. Have you read it ever? It is about a yacht race around the world, and it demonstrates so much of the failings of this over-preparedness or reliance on tech versus resilience engineering. Highly recommend checking out. We'll put the link in there.
Okay.
But it's a fascinating story. You have three people who took vastly different approaches to racing around the world without stopping. So they have to stay in their boat, not go into port and go around the world in a yacht, in a sailboat, essentially. And like one person has all these crazy gadgets. Doesn't turn out great for him. We'll just spoil that one a little bit. One person who, as you said, tries to makes a fantasy document I'm going to have so many answers to all the problems, and one person is like, how can I boil this down into the simplest thing to operate and then just over prepare on all the parts that need to be strong.
Just bring 4 spares of everything. Go.
Right. Or normally you put 4 coats of paint on the boat. I'm going to put 20 on because the paint can't fail. There's systems that can't fail. I'm going to focus on those. And then things that can fail, well, I'm not going to focus much on those. I'm going to factor them out. So it's a beautiful story. And it's a fairly famous story, actually. The sailor who won the race wrote some famous sailing books after that about basically having a peaceful and relaxing life. And I do consider him a hero for resilience engineering in that he argues for peace and simplicity, not for complexity and fun and tools and toys.
Nice. I would be remiss if I ended this episode without mentioning a field guide to understanding human error by Sidney Dekker, which I think was recently re-released. It is a seminal work for a lot of people and how they come to the new view of safety or safety 2 or whatever you want to call it. It's a great work, and it can help you understand why it's so important to move beyond human error as a focus in the work that we do.
I
Super
feel like
great.
we just got going. That one is amazing, but I can't believe neither of us. I definitely read it a couple of times, actually. Feels like our audience might have some of this too.
Yeah.
So maybe they could go to thisisfinepod.com and submit these along with their questions. And we would love to share some of your suggestions on another episode.
Yes, please do submit your suggestions right into us at thisisfine.softwarepodcast@gmail.com. Again, you can also send us your questions about resilience engineering. We're always up for hearing more things from folks, and you're keeping us in episode ideas. So thank you for that. Anything else, Clint? Anything you want to close with?
Well, I mean, I'm excited even more to do more episodes because I can feel that the engine's just getting started here, and I can just the questions I've seen come in too. I feel like people want to talk about this. I want to talk with people about this.
Yeah, let's do it. All right, we'll see you soon, everybody. Bye.
Bye.